When I offered to help with Jessica's wedding, I thought it was a gesture of love, not a contract to be erased. The house smelled of pot roast and stress. Meredith sat at the far end of the living room couch, a thick binder resting on her lap like a fragile infant. Around her, Jessica and Susan swirled in chaos. Color swatches fluttered, Pinterest boards were pulled up on iPads, and Ronald, half interested, sipped whiskey from a crystal glass he hadn't washed since Christmas. I was thinking blush and ivory for the centerpieces, Jessica said, twirling her phone. Maybe some floating candles? Susan nodded vigorously. Absolutely. And don't forget the Dove release after the vows. Magical. Meredith cleared her throat gently, flipping to the budget tab in her meticulously organized spreadsheet. That's a beautiful idea, she offered. But the Dove release alone is nearly $800. If we want to keep this under... Jessica rolled her eyes. Meredith, can we not talk money tonight? Susan chimed in, sweet as poison. Let her dream, honey. We can look at numbers later. Meredith lowered her eyes to the binder. She had already added up the florist deposits, gown fittings, the down payment on the venue, most of it on her own credit card. Jessica had maxed out hers within a month of the engagement. Still, no one mentioned that. Maybe we just set a cap. Meredith tried again, softer now. It helps to keep things on track. Jessica flashed a bright smile that didn't touch her eyes. You're always so practical. That's what I love about you. Then, with deliberate subtlety, she turned her phone slightly to one side, enough for Meredith to catch a glimpse of an active group chat lighting up. Jessica's name bold, with Susan and Ronald's initials beside emojis. Laughter bubbles popped up. Meredith wasn't in the group. She didn't say a word. She just watched the screen dim as Jessica slid it away. Dinner dragged on. Meredith kept her mouth shut as Jessica gushed about the dress moment she'd envisioned. Susan nodded. Ronald muttered something about cake tears. No one asked Meredith what she thought. They only paused to ask for her card number. Later that night, she lingered at the edge of the hallway, binder hugged to her chest, just out of sight. Susan's voice floated through the crack of Jessica's bedroom door. We just want this day to be perfect for you, Susan whispered. Meredith doesn't need the spotlight. She never has. Jessica giggled softly. She's like furniture, supportive, but not meant to be seen. Meredith didn't flinch. She simply turned away, stepping back into her childhood bedroom, the only room in the house untouched by tool and tension. She opened the wedding budget binder, flipping to the first page with calm fingers, and stopped. The sections she had labeled organizer, support, logistics, all carefully highlighted in green, were blank. Her name, once printed in neat block letters, had been erased, whited out, gone. Only Jessica's looping signature remained, claiming ownership of every column. Meredith opened the wedding budget binder and found that her name has been erased from all sections labeled organizer or support. The text came at 11:42 p.m., 2 nights after I paid for the venue. Meredith stared at the glowing screen, the blue light slicing through the soft dark of her apartment. It was from Jessica. Just one bubble of casual cruelty wrapped in civility. Hey, Jess wants to keep it small and intimate. We didn't want you to feel obligated. Hope you understand. No greeting, no thanks, no punctuation outside of the emoji. She reread it 5 times, waiting for it to change meaning, morph into something less absurd. But the words stayed as they were, gentle in tone, gutting in content. Meredith sat motionless on the edge of her couch, mug of chamomile forgotten in her hands. The room was silent except for the low hum of her fridge and the occasional crack of the wall heater. Outside, spring rain whispered against her window. Small and intimate. That was the excuse. But 2 nights ago, she had wired over the second deposit to the venue, a sun-drenched vineyard in Yamhill County, the kind Jessica had always dreamed of. Meredith had taken time off work, driven out there with Susan and Jessica, endured 2 hours of wine tasting and Pinterest-perfect vision boards, then footed the bill while everyone else cooed about champagne flutes and string quartets. She didn't even like weddings. But that wasn't the point. Something hollow settled in her chest. Her fingers moved on their own, dialing the venue. It rang 4 times before a chipper voice answered. "Hello, Maple Crest Vineyards, this is Riley." "Hi," Meredith said, trying to keep the waver out of her voice. "I just wanted to confirm a detail about the Edwards-Hart wedding. June 17th? Let me check." The girl tapped keys. "Yes, we have Jessica Edwards and—" A pause. "Planning contact listed as Susan Edwards. Is that you?" "No," Meredith said slowly. "I used to be on the planning file." There was silence, then a gentle, professional backpedal. "Oh, I see some changes were made last week. I'm not sure of the details." "No worries," Meredith said, voice clipped now. "Thanks." She hung up, heart pounding harder than it should. Her thumbs hovered over her messages. She tapped open the last thread with Naomi, one of Jessica's bridesmaids, someone she barely knew but had once shared margaritas with during a girls' planning night. Meredith typed, "Hey, quick question. Did Jessica say anything about the guest list?" 3 dots, then a reply. "Wait, I thought you were the MOH?" Meredith stared at the message. Her mouth opened slightly, no words coming out. Then she typed back, "Apparently not invited." The dots popped up again, disappeared. Then nothing. She tossed the phone aside, stomach curling in on itself. The apartment was too quiet, too still. The betrayal was too quiet, too polite. She walked to the kitchen and leaned on the counter, willing her legs to hold. A ding. Instagram notification. Jessica had just posted a story. Curiosity overrode her better judgment. It was a photo of Jessica in her bridal robe, surrounded by bridesmaids in matching pink satin, their hands raised in mock surprise. Everyone was glowing. The caption scrawled across the image in a cursive font. "Surround yourself with those who matter." Meredith wasn't in it, not even in the mirror reflection, not even tagged. She stood there for a long time, not crying, not blinking, just breathing. Then, in the smallest voice, she whispered to herself, "I paid for that dress." 3 days later, a zip file landed in my inbox. The subject line, "You deserve to know." Meredith sat motionless at her desk, coffee gone cold beside her. She hadn't heard from Naomi since that late-night exchange. She'd chalked it up to awkwardness, maybe regret, maybe fear. But this was something else. Her finger hovered over the trackpad. She clicked. The zip file opened slowly, revealing a neat collection of folders. Screenshots, audio, designs, and one labeled Meta Notes. The names alone sent a ripple of unease through her spine. She started with the screenshots. The first few were innocuous. Photos from bridal brunches, Pinterest boards with dusty rose palettes. But then came the group chats. "Let's just call her the wallet sister, LOL." One message from Jessica read. Meredith blinked. Her face remained blank, but something in her chest caved a little. Another bridesmaid, someone named Chloe, had replied, "She doesn't need to be there. She'll just make things all formal and boring." Then Naomi's response from weeks ago. "Shouldn't she at least know what's happening? She's paid for half this." Jessica again. "No drama, Nay. We'll keep it soft. Like, slowly phase her out. No hard feelings, okay?" It continued like that. Weeks of plans, passive-aggressive half-truths. Messages exchanged while Meredith thought they were bonding over wine and color swatches. She'd driven Naomi home that night after Jessica's second dress fitting. They'd laughed about the over-the-top lace train. Naomi had toasted to sisters-in-law by heart, if not by blood. Now those memories felt contaminated. Meredith clicked into the Designs folder. There it was. Her logo. The elegant, intertwined J&M she'd spent an entire Saturday perfecting in Canva. Jessica had stripped her name from the file, reused the graphic for invitation templates, welcome signage, and even bridesmaid t-shirts. all of it under a watermark that said simply, by Edwards Events. She felt her throat tighten. Naomi had included a voice memo. Meredith hit play. I didn't know it was this bad until I saw how they were talking about you behind your back, Naomi said softly. Her voice was shaky but firm. I'm sorry. I should have said something sooner. I didn't want to be part of this anymore. Meredith stared at the wall, the quiet hum of her apartment louder than any apology. She wasn't angry yet. She was something colder, something closer to calculating. She opened the meta notes folder. Naomi had annotated some of the screenshots, timestamps, chat participants, even a couple of images showing that Jessica had been planning a different bridal shower, one that excluded Meredith entirely. The layers of deception weren't just accidental, they were orchestrated. The last file was a single PNG of a message from Susan, tucked between scheduling notes and updates on florals. Susan had written, just make sure Meredith doesn't get a whiff of the real guest list. She'd ask too many questions. No flourish, no apology, just a directive. Meredith sat back in her chair, exhaling slowly. The ache behind her eyes was real, but it didn't spill over. Not anymore. She opened her own Google Drive, created a new folder, named it, for later. Then, one by one, she dragged the files in. The evidence, the receipts, the pieces of a story no one expected her to collect. Not yet revenge, but no longer ignorance, just intent. They expected me to fund the flowers and fade away. I did neither. Meredith closed her laptop gently, fingers still resting on the keyboard. The morning sun cut through the blinds, slicing her desk into bands of shadow and light. She hadn't slept much, but her mind was sharper than it had been in weeks. She clicked open the tab labeled Wedding Vendors and began dialing. The florist picked up on the third ring, a breathy voice too cheerful for 9 a.m. Bloom Theory, how can we help you? This is Meredith Hart. I'm calling regarding order number 6745, the Edwards Hart wedding for June 17th. Ah, yes. Final invoice just went out. Your peonies are locked in. Meredith's tone didn't waver. I'm canceling the order. Effective immediately. There's been a breach of terms. A pause. Oh, may I ask? You may not, she said, voice clipped. I've already stopped the payment authorization. If you attempt to charge me again, I will file for procurement fraud. The florist tried to pivot. Discounts, rescheduling, store credit. But Meredith ended the call before the second offer left her lips. She opened her inbox and drafted a new email. Subject, request for event cancellation due to misrepresentation. To whom it may concern, I was originally listed as the financial coordinator for the Edwards Hart event scheduled on June 17th. I have since been removed from the planning record without my knowledge or consent. This constitutes client misrepresentation and voids any contractual obligation I may have had. I am requesting a formal cancellation and refund of all deposits paid under my name. Attached are relevant documents. Regards, Meredith Hart. Click. Sent. She leaned back, stretched her fingers. The ring light she'd used for Zoom meetings flickered briefly, an echo of the orderly life she'd once clung to. That Meredith, the one who picked up brunch tabs and diffused tension with spreadsheets, was gone. In her place stood something quieter, sharper. She opened a blank tab and typed slowly. 2. Rebecca Carlson. Subject, long time. Digital help? Hey, still working in digital forensics? Need a favor. Happy to pay. It involves metadata, screenshots, and let's just say, some very polished liars. She hit send, then returned to her task list. The cake vendor, the table rentals, the live band Jessica had begged for, promising to pay but never following through. Meredith had signed for all of it. Time to untangle herself from every thread. She clicked into the bakery's site and opened the client portal. The invoice for $1,250 had been scheduled for autodraft that Friday. Meredith deleted the payment method and attached a formal notice. Client no longer authorized. Midway through her cancellations, her phone buzzed. Jessica, Did you cancel the cake? Meredith stared at the screen. No greeting, no explanation, just outrage and a question mark. She locked the phone, said nothing. The phone buzzed again. Jessica, now typing a string of follow-ups. But Meredith didn't bother to read. A new email pinged in her inbox. Rebecca Carlson. I do. Send everything. Let's talk metadata. The final RSVP list had no Meredith, so I created my own entrance. Meredith parked at the edge of the vineyard lot, beneath the shade of a sycamore. A gentle breeze stirred the tall grass around the gravel, the Oregon spring air heavy with lavender and something else. Anticipation. She stepped out slowly, her flats crunching softly on the stones, and slung her tote bag over one shoulder. Inside it, nestled between a folded brochure and a pen that had seen too many contract signings, was a black USB drive. It was labeled in silver marker, Ceremony Slideshow, Final. She had timed it precisely, 2:45 p.m. The staff walkthrough would be in full swing, and most of the chaos would be centered around floral arrangements and seating logistics. No one would question a woman who looked like she belonged. Clipboard in hand, calm and dressed in business casual. Meredith walked past the trellis being hoisted into place, past a teenage assistant wrangling lanterns, and toward the media booth nestled behind the ceremony lawn. A man in his late 20s looked up from his laptop. Can I help you? I'm from Edwards Events, she said smoothly, lifting her clipboard. Just dropping off the final slideshow file for tomorrow. Jess said to bring it directly. You're the AV guy? He blinked but nodded. Yeah, okay. She handed over the USB with a practiced smile. He glanced at it. It says final. Is this the version she sent last week or? Latest, Meredith said. She wanted a surprise ending. You know how she is. The guy chuckled. Sure, got it. I'll plug it in and cue it for pre-roll. Meredith nodded, stepped back and let the moment settle. She made no move to rush out. Instead, she glanced around the empty rows of white chairs, the golden aisle runner, the faux eucalyptus draping over the arch. From a speaker nearby, a rehearsal cue sounded. Jessica's voice, high and excited, practicing her entrance timing. Okay, so when the music swells here, I'll walk with Dad. No, not before the drop, remember? It's a moment. Meredith slipped out the side gate and back to her car. She pulled out her phone, opened the backup folder she'd prepared. Screenshots, audio clips, metadata chains, all uploaded to cloud storage with layers of encryption, just in case. A message came in. Rebecca. Confirmed. Metadata matches. Files trace back to her account, not yours. You're good. Meredith exhaled. Later that evening, in the quiet of her apartment, she opened a draft email. The subject line was already written. You earned this. The recipient, Jessica Edwards. Events@gmail.com delivery time, 4:15 p.m., exactly as the ceremony would begin. Attached were PDFs, recordings, and the bridesmaid group chat log. No words in the body. Just a clean, silent RSVP to the party she paid for but was never invited to. Before bed, she opened one last folder, the one labeled Stage 2. Nothing dramatic yet. Just names, contact info, and a draft letterhead addressed to the small claims court. At 11:12 p.m., Meredith glanced out her window, city lights dimmed under the misty clouds. She felt lighter. Not vindicated, not yet, but no longer burdened by hoping things would fix themselves. The next morning, she returned to the venue. No clipboard this time, no tote bag, just curiosity. As she strolled quietly past the welcome table, she paused for a second. There, neatly printed in looping gold font on a heavy white card, was the place setting that read, Reserved for Family. She smiled, not cruelly, just knowingly, and walked on. They mic'd Jessica up for a behind-the-scenes video. Unfortunately for her, I had the uncut version. The sun filtered through the gauzy canopy of the Willow Ridge Estate's garden tent, casting a warm glow over mimosa glasses, polished silverware, and the endless sea of blush and cream floral arrangements. Laughter floated across the tent like confetti, delicate, hollow, and timed for the cameras. Meredith watched from her car across the gravel drive, parked strategically behind a row of delivery vans. The brunch was in full swing. A few pastel dresses and swinging clipboards zipped past her windshield. Her phone was in her hand, screen already open to the feed from a hidden live stream Naomi had set up. Jessica was seated at the center of the long table, all eyes on her. She beamed, radiant in a white romper with feathered sleeves, her blonde hair curled to perfection. A videographer hovered nearby, adjusting the small wireless mic clipped under her neckline. "This angle okay?" the man asked. Jessica smirked. "As long as you get my good side. I've got like 6. Meredith's thumb hovered over the brightness button, dimming her screen. The audio was feeding in clearly now. Jessica's voice, light and lilting, floating into her car like poison wrapped in chiffon. "I swear," Jessica said between sips of champagne. "If I see one more pity text from Meredith, I'll scream. She really thinks she's part of this." The bridesmaids laughed, some too loudly. "She's like a moth, just flapping around the candle, not realizing no one wants her there," Jessica continued. "At least she's useful. I mean, who else would foot the bill for all this?" Chloe leaned in. "Wasn't she supposed to be the maid of honor?" Jessica scoffed. "Please, that was just to get her to pay for the planner deposit. As soon as the venue was locked, I deleted her from the WhatsApp." Meredith didn't flinch. She watched the video team nod, oblivious. The editor would cut around the comments, of course. Clean it up for TikTok and Instagram Reels, 30 seconds of giggles and gratitude. But not today. She tapped the side pocket of her bag where a different USB had rested only hours earlier. A quiet switch, one labeled exactly like the original. Brunch raw footage, for edits. Except this one wasn't edited at all. She watched as the tech guy behind the flower wall gave a thumbs up. A portable screen lit up. The speakers came to life. At first, the guests smiled, expecting a montage of cute bloopers. Then Jessica's voice rang out, crystal clear, laced with venom. "If I see one more pity text from Meredith, I'll scream." It took a beat before anyone processed it. Then the murmurs started. A few heads turned toward Jessica, who was frozen mid-sip, her eyes locked on the screen. "Shut it off," she barked. The AV guy scrambled. Too late. The clip had already rolled into the next. Jessica mocking Naomi's dress and suggesting Susan fake a cough to avoid talking to Meredith's side of the family. Phones were raised. Guests looked at each other, some suppressing smirks, others stunned. Jessica shoved back her chair and stormed away, her heels catching briefly on the tent carpet. Susan followed her quickly. "Sweetheart, breathe. It's just a mistake." Jessica spun. "Someone switched the files." Susan's voice dropped, too low for the mic, but easy to read from the camera angle. "Just deny it. No one will believe Meredith could pull this off." Across the property line, Meredith's phone vibrated. Naomi. "They played the wrong file. She's losing it." Seconds later, another message buzzed through. "Rebecca, ready for phase 2? Meredith leaned back against the driver's seat, folding her arms. The smirk that curled on her lips wasn't satisfaction. Not yet. Just the certainty that the rules of the game had changed. She was no longer the sideline sister. She was the one writing the script. Turns out no one reads the fine print, except me. At exactly 9:03 a.m., Meredith parked again just outside the east entrance of Willow Ridge Estate, slipping into the same spot she had used yesterday. The morning sun had barely burned off the coastal haze, and already the estate buzzed with movement. White tablecloths were being steam-ironed on long banquet tables, floral arches assembled with trembling hands, and waitstaff in black slacks rushed between the kitchen and the tented patio. Inside her passenger seat, her laptop glowed softly. Meredith's email was open, a thread 15 messages deep with subject lines like contract discrepancy, urgent, request for documentation, and venue use authorization, all addressed to her, all signed by the Willow Ridge Estate Management. She smiled faintly. Last night, after the brunch debacle, she'd sent the first quiet reminder, a PDF attachment labeled Event Agreements, Edward's Wedding. Inside it was her signature on every document that mattered. Venue deposit, catering reservation, audio-visual package. Jessica's name was absent from all of them. A small oversight, if one didn't care about who legally controlled the flow of the event. Her phone buzzed on cue. Susan, mobile, calling. Meredith watched the screen for a moment before silencing it. The call cut off, followed immediately by a text. Please call me. This is a misunderstanding. A second later came a more frantic one from Jessica. What is happening? She didn't reply. Instead, she dialed the venue office directly. Hi, this is Meredith Powell. I believe you are expecting my documentation? Yes, Ms. Powell. The manager replied with professional tightness. We've reviewed the files. You are, according to our records, the sole contract holder for the ceremony grounds, catering, and audiovisual setup. Correct. Unfortunately, given the emails we've received from someone else attempting to override those settings, Jessica Edwards, we've had to pause all preparation until the rightful authority is clarified. Meredith didn't answer immediately. She opened a folder on her desktop labeled Rebecca Confirmed and dragged 3 time-stamped documents into a new draft email. She hit send. Just sent you verification of the payment trail and metadata, she said. Original files were edited by a third party after I made the deposits. I'd like that noted. A few beats of silence. Then the manager spoke again, more carefully. Understood. Thank you, Ms. Powell. Across the lawn, the tented area began to shift. Chairs that had been lined in tidy rows were now being rearranged, then stopped. A group of servers huddled with a clipboard-wielding supervisor. The florist removed a centerpiece mid-placement and looked uncertainly toward the driveway. Jessica came storming down the path from the bridal suite, robe flapping behind her like the cape of a doomed empress. She shouted something Meredith couldn't hear, then pointed toward the AV booth. Another call buzzed in. Susan, Mobile. Calling. Meredith declined again. Inside the venue, confusion mounted. She could almost feel it through the windshield. The rising tension, the unraveling timeline, the helpless flutter of vendors caught between 2 versions of the truth. Her phone chimed with a new message. Rebecca. All files backed up. Matching metadata timestamps confirmed. No one can fake this now. And then, faint but audible through her cracked window, Jessica's voice pierced the air. If she ruins this for me, I'll destroy her. Meredith leaned back, her seat slightly reclined. She whispered to no one in particular, voice calm and nearly amused. Good luck. The guest list had 112 names. Mine wasn't on it, but neither was the truth. The staff entrance at Willow Ridge was nothing like the grand brick archway the guests used. It was narrow, poorly landscaped, and partially obscured by a line of service carts. That was precisely why Meredith chose it. She stepped through the side gate without hesitation, her black flat soundless on the gravel. Her dress was simple, a navy sheath with no embellishments, and her hair was pulled back with surgical precision. There was no badge, no clipboard, no entitlement in her stance. Yet, as she crossed into the lawn, she carried more presence than anyone else there. The outdoor ceremony space shimmered in early afternoon light. Rows of white chairs fanned out before a makeshift altar decked with roses and eucalyptus. A string quartet played a soft melody, something romantic, forgettable. Guests trickled in, chattering in pastel linen and heels, clutching glasses of champagne. Nobody stopped her. Meredith walked past a sign labeled Reserved for Immediate Family and headed toward a row near the middle. Her eyes caught whispers before her ears did. An older couple glancing sideways, a teenage niece murmuring into her phone. Naomi found her first. She approached from the side, arms folded but expression warm. I saved you a seat, she said softly. Third row. Shade hits it by 3. Meredith hesitated for a fraction of a second. You sure? Naomi nodded. You earned this more than any of them. The two women walked together, unhurried. Meredith sat. She smoothed the crease from her lap and looked up, eyes catching the string lights overhead, the giant screen off to the side where the ceremony slideshow would play. Guests filed in. Some gave her double takes. A few didn't recognize her, but a few did, and that was enough. Jessica appeared from the bridal tent moments later, arm locked with her soon-to-be husband, Zach. She was glowing, at least on the surface. Her dress shimmered, custom lace stitched along the bodice. But there was tension in her jaw, a flicker of panic behind her rehearsed smile. A bridesmaid whispered in her ear. Jessica's eyes scanned the rows, then locked onto Meredith. A flash of disbelief, then fury. But before Jessica could react, the music paused. The screen on the side of the altar flickered to life. First, a gentle slideshow. Childhood photos. A shot of Jessica and Zach at the engagement dinner. Her laughing beside a tiered cake. Her kissing his cheek in a blurry rooftop photo. Then a pause. The slideshow stilled on a blank black slide. And then the audio began. At first, it was unclear. Static, a bit of laughter, background noise. Then, Jessica's voice. Crisp, clear, unmistakable. God, I swear if Meredith shows up, I'll actually vomit. Who does she think she is? Just because she paid for a few things doesn't mean she's like, family. Laughter. I mean, she's just pathetic. You saw that binder she made? As if we'd actually use any of her ideas. I'm not letting her ruin my aesthetic. There was a collective inhalation from the audience. Heads turned. Phones emerged from clutches and coat pockets. A man in the front row whispered, "Did she just say?" On screen, another slide appeared. A Canva mock-up of the ceremony's original invitation. One designed by Meredith, her name still visible in the file metadata at the corner. Jessica's face drained of color. "Shut that off!" she shrieked. The AV staff scrambled. Someone tripped over a cable. The screen froze mid-slide, Jessica's voice still echoing over the speakers. Meredith doesn't belong here. Never did. Meredith didn't move. She simply folded her hands in her lap and looked toward the altar. Across the aisle, phones were already recording. Some guests stood, not sure whether to stay or leave. Zach looked frozen in place, hands limp at his sides. Susan tried to gesture toward the sound booth, but no one knew where the signal was coming from, because the signal hadn't come from them. It came from the USB Meredith had dropped off yesterday, labeled plainly, neatly, ceremony slideshow. Final. No one thought to check it. Jessica stumbled back a step, eyes darting, heart racing. And Meredith? She allowed herself the smallest smile, just enough to be seen. Jessica had a plan A, plan B, and a backup florist. But there was no plan for being publicly humiliated. For a moment after the audio cut off, the garden fell into an uncanny silence. The string quartet stopped mid-measure. The wind rustled the eucalyptus garland strung along the altar, but no one dared move. Then came the sound of chairs scraping back, a cough, a murmur, and then more. Was that really her voice? Did she say pathetic? She called her own sister. The whispers snowballed. Jessica stood frozen at the edge of the aisle, her veil slightly askew, breath short and uneven. Her cheeks burned with the kind of flush that even the best foundation couldn't conceal. Zach turned slowly toward her. He hadn't moved until now. His gaze, once soft and foolishly enchanted, had hardened into something unreadable. "You lied to everyone," he said. Quiet, controlled. "About everything." Jessica blinked. "Zach, baby, it's not what it sounded like." He held up a hand. Not for silence, but distance. Naomi stood by the side, her phone still in her hand, though she wasn't recording anymore. Her eyes met Meredith's across the garden. She didn't nod. She didn't smile. But the message was clear. It worked. Susan pushed through the guests like a woman trying to put out a fire with her bare hands. Her heels sank into the soft grass, but she kept moving, clutching the hem of her expensive blouse to keep from tripping. "Meredith," she hissed under her breath as she reached the third row. "Please, whatever this is, it's gone far enough." Meredith didn't stand. She didn't flinch. She simply turned her head slowly to meet her mother's eyes. "You already went far enough," she said. "I'm just walking away." Ronald wasn't there. No one had noticed him vanish, but his chair sat empty, his name card fluttering in the breeze. One guest later claimed he'd been seen heading toward the parking lot with a Bluetooth in his ear, muttering about a client emergency. Zach stepped onto the platform where the microphone still stood askew. The screen behind it frozen on a pause slide of Jessica and her bridesmaids, their grins now sinister in context. "I can't do this," he said aloud, into the mic. "Not like this." Jessica spun toward him, voice shrill. "Zach, you're being dramatic. She's manipulating you. She planned this." He looked down at the mic in his hand. Then, without another word, he let it drop. The thud echoed louder than expected. Someone gasped. Jessica rushed forward, tripping slightly on her train, reaching out to him. "Please, you can't walk away. We have guests." Zach didn't even turn around. He stepped off the platform and walked straight down the aisle, guests parting like water. Inside the reception hall, confusion had already reached the catering staff. Champagne sat untouched. Plates of crab cakes waited to be served. A DJ checked the time and his playlist. No one knew if the party was still happening. Susan stood in place, shoulders trembling, jaw tight. Naomi handed her a glass of water. She didn't drink it. Jessica, breathless, spinning, turned toward the crowd, then toward her sister. "You've ruined everything," she cried out. Meredith finally stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't make a scene. She met her sister's eyes with the calm of someone who had already let go. "No," she said. "I just stopped funding it." And with that, she turned. No applause, no validation, just the sound of one woman walking away while 100 people stood frozen in the wreckage of a perfect day undone. But someone, somewhere in the crowd, whispered, "Good for her." They tried to find me later that day, but I had already disappeared. It wasn't a grand escape. No screeching tires, no passports tucked in back pockets. Just silence. A deliberate withdrawal that started the moment I turned away from Jessica's tear-streaked face and let the sound of my footsteps carry me out of Willow Ridge. I didn't look back. Not when the wind picked up and the garland came loose. Not when someone called my name in a half-hearted whisper. Let them look. Let them wonder. By nightfall, I was gone. The prepaid SIM card I had bought a week earlier finally slid into place. The burner phone blinked to life. Blank, anonymous. I powered down the old one, tucked it into a padded envelope, and dropped it in a mailbox outside the grocery store in Ashland. No return address, just distance. I drove for hours into the mountains, each curve of the road unspooling the tension knotted between my shoulder blades. By the time I reached the cabin, my knuckles no longer ached from gripping the wheel. It was an old place, bare bones and humble, but it belonged to me. Or rather, it didn't belong to them. That was enough. The next morning, I emptied every group chat archive, deleted email threads, blocked the numbers of people I once smiled politely at during holidays. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I simply erased them the way they'd erased me. Rebecca's last message had come through just before I pulled into the gravel driveway. "Everything is done. They'll have no idea what hit them. Proud of you." I didn't reply, not in words. I left her a voicemail, just 6 words. "Thank you, please burn the rest." And I knew she would. The cabin had no Wi-Fi. That was intentional. I wanted no pings, no notifications, no family emergency texts pretending to mend bridges only when optics demanded it. I wanted peace. Or at least the quiet that comes before peace has room to grow. The prepaid phone stayed silent except for one email from Naomi. The subject line read, "Wherever you are." I clicked it. Just one sentence inside. "Thank you. I hope you're free." I didn't cry, but I did smile. A soft, tired smile. One you give yourself when you know you did something painful, necessary, and irreversible. Then I deleted it. The days that followed were a blur of stillness. Morning walks to the post office where a new box, PO number 4287, waited for letters I didn't expect to receive. A hardware store visit where I paid cash for a wind chime and a potted fern. No one in town asked questions. I liked that. On the 6th day, I finally unpacked. Not the clothes, I had barely brought any, but the pieces of myself I'd buried for years under someone else's dream of what a daughter, a sister, a woman should be. I let them breathe. I let them rearrange the furniture. That afternoon, I hung the wind chime outside the front door. It wasn't fancy, just tin and string, delicate and imprecise. But it caught the light just right. As the first breeze drifted through the trees, it rang once, high and bright, the kind of sound that usually made me brace, an instinct from too many slammed doors and sharp words. But this time, it didn't hurt. This time, I stood there, listening, and let the sound settle into the bones of the cabin, and into mine. I was gone. And finally, I was home. The wedding fallout became gossip, but no one knew who orchestrated it, except the ones who mattered. Jessica sat on the edge of the floral couch in Ronald's sunlit living room, legs tucked under her like she was still a child hoping to escape punishment. The room smelled faintly of lemon polish and old guilt. Ronald paced near the bay window, mumbling into his phone before abruptly hanging up. Susan sat upright in an armchair, hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles gleamed white. The air between them was stretched thin, like it could snap if anyone so much as breathed wrong. Jessica had cried for hours, then stopped just as abruptly. Now, she just looked tired, defeated. She hadn't slept since the ceremony imploded. Her phone buzzed relentlessly. Tabloid bloggers, nosy acquaintances, even distant relatives asking if what they heard was true. She didn't answer any of them. "She's vanished," Susan whispered for the 3rd time, eyes distant. I've called, texted, even sent her a handwritten letter through Naomi. Nothing. Jessica didn't respond. Ronald lowered himself into the armchair across from Susan and let out a loud sigh, as if exhaling could undo months of damage. "I'm being investigated," he said flatly. "That damn loan I tried to push through under Meredith's name, it flagged her old employment records. Someone reported it anonymously. They're freezing assets, asking questions." Jessica looked up, alarmed. "You tried to use her name for a loan?" Ronald shrugged. "I thought she wouldn't care. She never cared before. She's family." "Were we ever her family?" Jessica muttered. Silence dropped like a bomb. Even Susan stopped fidgeting. For a moment, no one moved. Jessica broke it with a dry laugh. "You know what's funny? Everyone thought she was just there, reliable, boring, the one you could count on to clean up messes without making noise. And now?" Susan looked at her daughter, brows furrowing. "Now what?" Jessica leaned back and said it out loud for the first time. "She outplayed us." Susan blinked, confused and vulnerable in a way she rarely allowed herself to be. How did she know everything? How did she plan all this? Jessica looked directly at her, eyes burning. "Because we made her invisible. And invisible people see everything." A long breath escaped from Susan, followed by a silent tremble. Her hand rose instinctively to her necklace, a tiny silver cross she hadn't taken off in years. She turned toward Ronald for reassurance, but he was already lost in thought, muttering something about reputational damage and pension plans. The doorbell rang. None of them moved. Jessica stood, wobbling slightly. She pulled open the door to find Naomi. Not dressed up, not apologetic, just holding her phone out. No words, Naomi said, handing her the screen. Just read. Jessica narrowed her eyes and scanned the title of the open webpage. How to Disappear After You're Betrayed by Family. A Quiet Manifesto. Beneath the title was no byline, no name, just the subtitle, written by someone who stopped being polite. She scrolled. The first line hit like a slap. They won't believe you at first. That's fine. Let them call you dramatic. Let them call you ungrateful. Then leave anyway. Jessica didn't speak. She kept scrolling, her hands trembling as the words stacked, cold and clear, with phrases too specific to be coincidence. The story was anonymous, but unmistakably Meredith. Behind her, Susan began to cry softly. Jessica stared at the screen, lips parted. Naomi stepped back. She's not coming back, Naomi said. But I think she wanted you to know. She's not hiding either. Jessica closed the door without a word. They wanted a confrontation. I gave them silence. It echoed louder than rage. The mountain air tasted cleaner that morning, almost unnaturally crisp, as if the universe had hit a reset button. Meredith stepped out barefoot onto the wooden porch, a chipped mug of chamomile tea warming her fingers. The sky stretched wide and empty above. No planes, no sirens, no phone buzzing with guilt or expectation. Inside the cabin, the silence wasn't empty. It was full of choice, of agency, of peace. A single wind chime clinked softly by the window, whispering reminders that she was here, now, and free. The garden out back had started to bloom. Tomatoes, thyme, and hope. Meredith kneeled beside the raised beds, brushing soil from a fragile stem. This act, small, dirt-lined, quiet, felt more powerful than any confrontation she'd ever imagined. She didn't need to scream. The world was already listening. Earlier that week, Rebecca had texted a final link to a news alert. Ronald under formal investigation for falsifying loan documents. Susan's real estate listing had quietly dropped in price for the third time. Jessica, once so enamored with likes and filters, had disappeared from every PR firm's roster in the region. Meredith didn't respond. She didn't need to. The stray dog came back today. Not close, not begging, just lingering near the tree line, half hidden in the tall grass. A border collie mix, maybe. It had the eyes of someone who'd been let down but hadn't entirely given up on kindness. Meredith placed a shallow bowl of water near the porch and returned to her seat. She didn't call out. Trust took time. In the cabin, her laptop lay open to a blank blog entry. For weeks now, she'd written essays under a pseudonym. Reflections on betrayal, justice, the brutal clarity of walking away. The blog had found an audience. Quietly, anonymously. Other voices had joined. The chorus grew, line by line, person by person. An envelope lay by the door. Naomi's handwriting. Inside, a simple note. I've stopped seeing them too. I started therapy. I moved apartments. I got rid of my pastel bridesmaid dresses. Thank you for being the first person I saw choose themselves. Meredith smiled. She pulled a pen from the drawer and wrote a reply. You didn't need me to go first. You just needed proof it was possible. She stared at the words, fingers hovering. Then she tore the letter up and tossed it into the fire. Naomi didn't need her to answer. She was already moving forward. The afternoon passed slowly. Meredith took the dog, still cautious but curious, on a long walk down a narrow dirt path behind the cabin. No phone, no camera, just footsteps, leaves crunching, the sun making lacework through the trees. She didn't check her email until nightfall. On the porch, a small cardboard package had appeared. No signature, no delivery van. Just a quiet presence wrapped in paper. The envelope taped to the top said only, "Thank you." She didn't open it right away. She sat beside it, feeling its weight, both literal and not. Sometimes the loudest echo is what follows silence. And for the first time, Meredith didn't need to fill the void. It was enough just to be. She reached over and rang the wind chime with her fingertip. One soft note. Then another. The stray dog sat beside her, unafraid. Jessica always landed on her feet, but this time the ground gave way. The apartment was smaller than she remembered signing for. No doorman, no fresh flowers in the lobby. Just the faint scent of reheated leftovers trailing down the hallway as she fumbled with her keys. The lock stuck every third time. The elevator made a groan loud enough to shame her back into using the stairs. Inside, the air was still and heavy, thick with silence she used to crave and now couldn't stand. On the kitchen counter sat a tablet glowing with the last open app. A wedding blog she once admired, now hosting an anonymous essay titled, "Justice doesn't need to be angry. It just needs to be clear." The post had been shared over 40,000 times. The comments were relentless. The parallels were unmistakable. Even without her name mentioned, everyone knew. Her phone buzzed. Another unfollow. She didn't even check who anymore. The day after the wedding disaster, her old wedding club WhatsApp thread had gone eerily quiet. 2 days later, she was quietly removed. 3 weeks after, someone uploaded a video comparing her reception speech, complete with signature phrases and metaphors, to a now-deleted Pinterest quote template. The comments called her a plagiarist, a fraud, a liar. She reported the video. It stayed up. She sat cross-legged on the floor, chin resting on a half-unpacked box labeled Luxury Flatware, Registry. No one had asked for returns. No one wanted to talk. Zach had blocked her. His parents had sent a curt email stating they would be retrieving their portion of the engagement gifts. "No, hope you're doing okay. Just, we'll send someone Monday between 10 and 12. Please be available." There were no job offers, no campaigns. The firm where she'd once worked said the brand had moved in a different direction. She wasn't even asked to clear her desk in person. She reached for a glass of wine, but the bottle was empty. It had been since Tuesday. Jessica walked to the mirror above her tiny bathroom sink. Her reflection didn't lie. The mascara had flaked under her eyes. Her lips were cracked. Her once flawless hair was tied into a limp bun she hadn't brushed since morning. She stared, then asked the air, "Why did she do this to me?" But there was no echo. Only the truth, buried so long it now sounded like a second voice in her head. "She didn't. You did it to yourself." The tears came fast, but not loud. Jessica didn't sob. She simply broke. Quiet and alone, like a vase cracking from the inside before anyone hears the shatter. She walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge for something cold to press to her eyes, and stopped. Taped to the refrigerator door was an old wedding invitation. The fancy cardstock had curled slightly at the corners. She hadn't remembered putting it up, hadn't noticed it staying through the move. The gold-embossed font had faded, but the names still shimmered faintly. Jessica and Zach underneath, in the bottom left corner, was a printed line no one had noticed during the planning. Financed and organized by Meredith. It was the only copy with that footer. An early print. A mistake she'd meant to discard. She never had. And now, she couldn't bring herself to take it down. The apartment stayed quiet. The window rattled in the summer breeze, but no one called. No one checked in. Jessica leaned against the counter, arms wrapped around herself like that could undo the unraveling. Somewhere, Meredith was living in silence. And here, in this tiny apartment filled with yesterday's glitter, the silence screamed. It had been raining since dawn. Not the kind of rain that crashes and rolls, demanding attention, but the quiet kind, steady and unyielding. Meredith stood by the window, her fingers wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug. Steam rose gently from the tea she hadn't sipped. Outside, Echo, the dog that had once only hovered on the edges of her cabin, now slept curled under the awning, ears twitching with the rhythm of distant thunder. On the table sat the tin box. Small, unassuming, its corners worn smooth from years of use. Inside were 4 envelopes. None were torn open. Each one bore handwriting she recognized too well. Susan's script was still too formal, like she was trying to perform forgiveness. Jessica's slanted, dramatic scrawl shouted even in ink. Ronald's envelope, surprisingly, was there too. his writing blocky and unsure. And the fourth? Anonymous, with just her name and no return address. She didn't need to guess. Some things, you just know. She didn't open any of them. She hadn't since the first one arrived a month ago. But she kept them, pressed flat beneath a folded cloth, not for closure, but as proof that it all happened, that she hadn't imagined the betrayal, the silence, or the fire she'd quietly lit under every assumption they held about her. She closed the lid gently and slid the box back into the drawer. Then she pulled her leather-bound journal closer and uncapped the pen. I don't care what they say. I know who I am. That was all she wrote today. No exposition, no recounting. Just that. The truth was, the more she reclaimed of her peace, the less she needed to prove it. Her phone buzzed once, lighting up with a contact she hadn't seen in weeks. Rebecca. Meredith hesitated, thumb hovering. Then she answered. Hey, came Rebecca's voice, brighter than usual. So, I'm getting married. A beat of silence. Meredith smiled at the window. I'm happy for you. Rebecca hesitated. If you want, you'd have a front row seat. No, Meredith replied softly. But congratulations. Sincerely, another pause. No offense taken. Just understanding. I'll send photos, Rebecca offered, then hung up before Meredith could decline. She glanced back at Echo, who stirred just enough to glance her way, eyes half-lidded in lazy trust. Meredith opened the door and called his name. He bounded in, shaking off rain, and sat by her feet like he belonged there. Because now he did. She scratched behind his ears. We're not running anymore, Echo. We're just here. Later that night, as the wind tapered and the air smelled of pine and wet earth, she opened her laptop. The anonymous blog, once sporadic and hidden beneath layers of redirects, now had followers. People who left comments not asking for advice, but simply thanking her for reminding them that silence could be strength. She began typing again, slowly. Some invitations aren't meant to be accepted, and some exits are the beginning. She hit publish without rereading it. Then she closed the lid, fed Echo, and curled up by the fire, letting the silence wrap around her like a blanket. Not cold, not empty. Just hers. At last, it didn't echo. It settled. I never got invited back. That's the best gift they ever gave me. The forest glowed with a quiet kind of magic. Pine needles catching the amber light of late August. Birdsong threading the hush with soft punctuation. Meredith stood at the edge of the clearing, far enough not to be seen, close enough to feel it. Rebecca's wedding was everything hers wasn't. Modest, honest. No themes, no grand gestures. Just laughter that didn't sound rehearsed and faces that didn't need to be curated for photos. Meredith didn't walk toward the arch. She never intended to. Instead, she approached the guest book table while no one was looking and placed a simple envelope beside the jar of lavender sprigs. Inside was a note, penned in her careful hand. You invited me with love, not guilt. That matters. I won't join the celebration, but I celebrate with you. M. She stepped back into the trees, boots pressing softly into the moss. No fanfare, no goodbye. She had only walked a few yards when she heard a voice behind her. Meredith. She turned, and Naomi was running down the path in flats in a pale sundress, breathless but smiling. Her hair was shorter now, her expression brighter. Behind her, half hidden in the shadows, stood someone holding a camera. Her new partner, maybe. Meredith didn't ask. Naomi didn't say anything for a moment. She just pulled Meredith into a hug that was all spine and sincerity. You taught me boundaries, Naomi whispered. Meredith exhaled and nodded, her hands resting gently on Naomi's arms. They didn't need more words. Sometimes the presence itself was a language. I'm happy for you, Meredith said softly. Naomi smiled with glassy eyes and let her go. Don't disappear too hard. Meredith chuckled. Just enough. Then she turned back to the forest, walking deeper until the music faded behind her, replaced by the rhythm of leaves and the hush of a life unclaimed by chaos. The path to the cabin was overgrown, but Echo was waiting by the porch, tail sweeping the wood. Meredith gave him a pat, then unlocked the door and stepped inside. No mess, no clutter, just a kettle on the stove and the scent of rosemary from the drying bundles above the sink. She fastened the latch behind her with deliberate calm, no hesitation. She wasn't hiding. She was home. The sun had begun to dip. She lit a lamp and noticed something new on the table. A notebook. Cream-colored, thick, unmarked except for one line printed neatly on the first page. Book 1. On silence, survival, and soft power. She sat, opened the cover, touched the spine like it might vanish. She thought of all the letters she never opened, the rooms she never returned to, the names she no longer whispered at night. Justice wasn't loud. Peace wasn't dramatic. Some victories came without applause, but they lasted longer. She began to write, not for revenge, not for the past, but for herself. Outside, the wind shifted. Echo barked once, low and content, then curled back to sleep. And inside, Meredith wrote the first chapter. Not of what was taken from her, but of what she chose to keep. Some wounds don't scar. They bloom into resolve. Meredith didn't raise her voice, but every silent act carved its mark more deeply than vengeance ever could. Justice, when forged through patience and clarity, doesn't arrive with applause, but with permanence. When injustice is met with quiet courage, even those who laughed last will eventually fall silent. Sometimes the most powerful RSVP is absence, and the loudest verdict is living free. Like, share, and comment your thoughts on this story. Type 1 if you felt seen. Type 2 if something still feels unresolved.